Imagine giving up everything you have to raise two abandoned children, only to stand years later in a courtroom, your hands in chains, accused of a crime you didn't commit. The judge is about to send you away for life, when suddenly, the very children you once saved walk through the doors. What happens next will leave the entire courtroom, and you, speechless. Detroit winters are cruel. The wind doesn't just blow, it cuts. It slips through old coats, chills the bones, and reminds you that life is hard, especially for those with little. Factories fill the air with smoke. The streets smell of steel and sweat, and people hurry home with heads down, never daring to notice the ones left behind. On such a night, a man named James Walker limped down the street after a long shift at the steel plant. James was in his late 50s, worn down by years of heavy work. His back ached, his leg dragged slightly from an old injury that never healed, and his hands were rough from handling steel day after day. To the world, James looked like any tired old worker. But to his boss, Carl Henderson, he was worse than that. "You're too slow, Walker," Henderson often barked loud enough for the whole factory to hear. "You should be thanking me every day you have this job." Workers laughed, some nervously, some because they wanted to fit in. James never answered back. He had learned long ago that silence was safer. So he swallowed the humiliation and kept moving. That night, though, fate had something waiting for him. As James passed the back of a diner, he heard a faint sound. The soft hum of freezer fans mixed with the whistling of the wind. He turned and noticed two small figures huddled by the dumpster. His footsteps slowed. It was a boy and a girl. The boy looked about 10, thin as a stick, holding his little sister close. Their clothes were nothing but rags, their faces pale, their lips trembling from the cold. The boy wrapped an arm around the girl, as if trying to shield her, but it was clear they were both losing the fight against the bitter night. James froze. He could have walked on. In fact, his mind told him he should. He barely had enough to survive himself. His meals were often scraps, his apartment barely warm. He had nothing to give, and yet, as he stood there staring, he felt something stir deep inside. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, discarded, treated as though his life didn't matter. That feeling had never truly left him. He bent down slowly, his knees groaning in protest. "You kids got anywhere to go?" he asked softly. The boy tightened his grip on his sister and shook his head. No words, just silence. James hesitated. His boss's voice echoed in his head. "Don't waste time on strays." But just then, the little girl's hand slipped from her brother's arm and reached out. Tiny, trembling, ice cold. She placed her fingers in James's callous palm. That single touch broke through his doubt. "All right," James said quietly. "Come on." The boy hesitated, but when his sister stood up, he followed. And so, with slow steps, James led them out of the alley and down the street. When he reached his apartment building, neighbors peeked from behind cracked doors. Whispers floated in the hallways. "There goes that fool again. He can't pay his own bills. Now he's dragging kids home. He'll sink with them." James heard every word. He always did, but he didn't slow his steps. Inside his small apartment, there was no comfort, just peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch, and a noisy old heater that rattled more than it warmed. Still, James spread blankets across the couch and poured hot broth into bowls. The children ate as though they hadn't seen food in days. James sat in the corner, watching quietly, rubbing his aching leg. His cupboards would run empty faster now. Tomorrow, Henderson would insult him again. The neighbors would gossip. But at least tonight, those two children were not sleeping on frozen concrete. That thought alone gave James something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. And in that moment, though he didn't realize it yet, a bond was born, a decision made in silence, in the corner of a tiny apartment, that would one day echo louder than anything else in his life. That night, James lay awake long after the children had fallen asleep. He thought about the days to come. He thought about how hard it would be to stretch his paycheck even thinner, how Henderson would mock him for being late or tired. He thought about the whispers of neighbors who already doubted him, but he also thought about the way the little girl's hand had slipped into his. He thought about the boy's watchful eyes, tired but still alive with a spark of hope, and he whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "They won't be left out in the cold again. Not if I can help it." It was a promise, a quiet vow. James didn't know then how heavy that promise would become, or how much it would cost him. He didn't know the long nights of hunger he would endure, or the laughter he would have to face at work. He didn't know that years later, the children he chose to save would be the ones to save him. All he knew that night was simple. 2 fragile lives had been placed in his path, and he would not walk away. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of a story far greater than we can ever imagine. Morning always came too soon in Detroit. The alarm of the steel plant whistle echoed across the neighborhood, dragging men from their beds before the sun even touched the rooftops. James Walker rose with it, joints stiff, back aching, but now with 2 extra mouths to think about. Michael and Anna. That was the first thing on his mind each day. Their faces, still pale but slowly gaining life since the night he found them in the alley. His apartment had never been much, but now it was full of small sounds he had never heard before. The soft shuffle of Anna's feet as she followed him into the kitchen, Michael's questions about everything he saw, the clatter of spoons in chipped bowls. It was noisy in a way that reminded James of something he thought he'd lost long ago. Family. But family came with responsibility. And responsibility came with sacrifice. At the factory, Carl Henderson's voice cut sharper than the machine's. "Walker, you're slower than a mule. No wonder you're stuck in this dump of a neighborhood." And when word spread that James had taken in 2 children, Henderson found fresh ammunition. "Hey, boys, maybe we should get his orphans to work on the line. They'd move faster than him." The men laughed, some because they wanted to fit in, some because they were glad it wasn't them being mocked. James kept his head down. Every insult landed like a hammer, but he bore it for one reason. Those kids needed him. His wages barely covered rent. His food stretched thin. More than once, James skipped dinner, pretending he wasn't hungry, while Michael and Anna ate every crumb. His body weakened, but his heart grew stronger. When Anna's shoes fell apart, he patched them with tape until he found a second-hand pair at the market. When Michael needed paper for school, James tore out pages from an old notebook he had hidden away. Neighbors shook their heads. "That fool can't take care of himself. A black man raising 2 white kids? That'll only bring trouble." But James ignored them. He had lived long enough under the world's judgment. Now he chose to live under his own promise. Michael blossomed quickly. He was quiet at first, always watchful, always unsure if this safe place would last. But soon, he discovered the library down the street. Books became his treasure. He devoured them, page after page, teaching himself words bigger than his age, dreaming of things far beyond their small apartment. Anna had her own gift. She filled scraps of paper with drawings, houses with warm fireplaces, gardens blooming with flowers, families holding hands, pictures of a world she longed for. James watched her sketch with steady focus, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked, and he thought, this girl will build something beautiful one day. But life was not gentle. One bitter winter, Anna fell ill. Her small body shivered under thin blankets, her face flushed with fever. James knew what a clinic visit would cost, a day's wages, maybe more. But he didn't hesitate. He took her by the hand, his limp slowing every step, and walked her across the frozen streets. He sat with her for hours, whispering stories, holding her tiny hand until the doctor gave her medicine. That night, James went to bed hungry, his stomach empty, but his soul steady. He had kept his vow. Years passed. Seasons turned. The children grew taller, their voices stronger, while James's back bent lower under the weight of labor. His limp grew worse, his face lined deeper. Still, he pressed on. At school, Michael began to shine. Teachers noticed his sharp mind, his questions that cut to the heart of every lesson. Scholarships followed, small at first, then bigger. He carried himself with the quiet dignity James had taught him, shaking hands firmly, looking people in the eye. Anna grew bold. 2. In school debates, she was fearless, her voice ringing out against injustice. She defended classmates who were bullied, spoke against unfair rules, and never hesitated to stand tall. Even when others told her to sit down, she had inherited James's endurance, but she wore it with fire. Every success the children achieved was carved from James's sacrifice. He skipped meals. He patched clothes. He worked double shifts until his limp left him barely able to climb the stairs. But when he saw Michael poring over books late into the night, or Anna sketching dreams in her notebooks, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt purpose. Yet the world never stopped testing him. Henderson grew crueler with age. The more Michael and Anna succeeded, the more Henderson mocked. Walker, you're wasting your time. Those kids will forget you the moment they taste a better life. Mark my words. James never answered, but in his heart, doubt sometimes whispered. Would the children really remember him when they were grown? Or would they leave him behind? The way the world always left men like him behind? Still, he pushed the thought away. It doesn't matter, he told himself. What matters is that they get their chance. Because James Walker had lived long enough to know that life rarely gave second chances. He had been broken by work, dismissed by society, laughed at by neighbors. But if his sacrifices could open doors for Michael and Anna, then it was worth every insult, every ache, every hunger. One evening, as the children did their homework, James sat quietly at the table, watching in the glow of a single lamp. His body trembled with exhaustion. His hands shook slightly as he tried to patch his coat. Michael looked up. "Dad," he said softly. James froze. The word hung in the air, unexpected, heavy with meaning. Anna smiled, her pencil still moving across the page. "Yeah, Dad." For the first time in years, James felt tears sting his eyes. He turned his head away, pretending to focus on his stitching, but inside, something long buried cracked open. He wasn't just a tired old man limping home from a factory anymore. He was a father. He was the center of a small, fragile family built not by blood, but by choice. And though the world outside still mocked, still doubted, James Walker knew in that moment that his sacrifices were not in vain. The years had carved James Walker into a man bent and weary. His body moved slower now, his limp heavier with every step. The factory machines roared louder, the insult from Henderson cut sharper, and yet James endured, clinging to the quiet satisfaction of seeing Michael and Anna grow into strong young adults. But Henderson never forgot his bitterness. Each day James showed dignity in the face of mockery, each success the children earned. It all burned Henderson like salt in a wound. He could not stand the idea that a man he called useless could raise 2 children into something extraordinary. So Henderson plotted. It happened one autumn morning. James returned home to find his apartment door splintered open, policemen swarming inside. Neighbors crowded the hallway, whispering, pointing. "Mr. Walker?" An officer barked. "We have a warrant." James's heart pounded as they pulled a bag from under his couch. A bag stuffed with cash and factory equipment marked with Henderson's logo. James stared, stunned. He had never seen it before. By nightfall, he was in handcuffs. The whispers spread fast. Knew it. Always said he was too good to be true. Pretended to be a saint. Turns out he was just a thief. James lowered his head. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of shame crushing him. In court, the air was thick with judgment. Henderson sat smugly in the gallery, his suit pressed, his smirk unshakable. Paid witnesses swore they had seen James sneaking around the storage rooms. Prosecutors painted him as a bitter old man who had finally snapped, stealing what he thought the world owed him. The gallery buzzed with cruel whispers. Guess his kindness was just an act. Those kids he raised probably don't even know the truth. James sat silent, hunched over. He wanted to shout, to fight, to tell the world the truth, but a lifetime of swallowing insults had trained him into silence. And more than anything, he didn't want Michael and Anna to see him like this. When the judge raised the gavel to deliver a life sentence, James closed his eyes. Maybe Henderson was right. Maybe men like him never truly rose above their place. Then the doors creaked open. Two figures walked in, tall and unshaken. Not the frail children James had once let out of the cold, but adults now, strong, confident. Michael, Anna. The courtroom stirred. Whispers turned to gasps. Henderson's smirk faltered. Michael stepped forward, a thick stack of files in his hands. His voice rang out, clear and steady. My name is Michael Walker. I stand here as defense counsel for the man who raised me. The room froze. James's eyes widened, his chest tightening with disbelief. Anna lifted a recorder, her eyes sharp, her notepad in hand. She wasn't there to watch. She was there to expose the truth. Piece by piece, Michael dismantled the prosecution's case. Witnesses faltered under his questioning. Their lies cracked under pressure. And then Anna delivered the bombshell. She read aloud from her investigation, records of Henderson's corruption, proof of wage theft, falsified accounts, years of exploitation hidden in plain sight. The gallery erupted. Henderson's face turned crimson, fists trembling as the truth cornered him. His empire of lies collapsed under the weight of facts Michael and Anna had gathered. The judge leaned back, eyes heavy with thought. At last, his gavel struck the bench. This case is built on falsehoods. The charges against James Walker are dismissed. Gasps, applause, relief flooding the room. Henderson stormed out, his power shattered, his legacy reduced to disgrace. Michael placed a hand on James's shoulder. His voice softened, no longer the commanding tone of a lawyer, but the tender voice of a son. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Dad. That word, Dad, broke something open in James. Not chains, not bars, but the deep ache of a life spent doubting his worth. Tears filled his tired eyes. Anna leaned close, her own voice trembling but fierce. We're here because you never gave up on us. Now it's our turn. The neighbors who once mocked stood silent, some ashamed, some in awe. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every moment. And James, bent and weary, finally lifted his head high. He had once pulled two shivering children out of the cold. He had given them food when his own stomach was empty, given them hope when he had none left for himself. And now, years later, those children, his children, had pulled him out of a cage built by lies. Because kindness doesn't die. It waits. It grows. And when the time is right, it saves. James Walker never imagined that one small act of compassion on a freezing Detroit night would one day save his own life. But this story is proof, for all who hear it, that every act of kindness plants a seed. And one day, when the world turns against you, that seed may grow into the shelter that saves you.